Hey friends, in this video for the pullover hoodie, I want to show you how I sew in the snap placket at center front and my method for getting a clean and professional finish where the placket meets the hood. For the demonstration, I have front, upper, and I've attached hood to it. So this is the neckline. I've marked my center front up here as well as down along the bottom edge, and I've aligned placket to center front with right sides facing. So right sides together. This is the wrong side of placket, but the right side of the front upper. And the total height of this placket should come from the bottom seam all the way up past the hood. I've drawn on here what I'm going to sew. There'll be 2 straight seams on either sides of center front with a spacing of 1/2 inch. After sewing these 2 seams on opposite sides of center front, I'm now going to cut through front, upper, and placket all the way up and separate these 2 halves. With your 2 halves separate, the next step is to fold the placket open. This is again right sides facing. And to get a nice crisp finish here, especially if your placket is less thick than your fleece, which it most likely is, we're going to top stitch the placket down flat along the seam allowance that's left over on the bottom. So here's my seam allowance. I just folded this over and I'm going to top stitch the placket into that seam allowance real close to this edge. It's just going to be an edge stitch about 1 millimeter away from that edge. With that edge top stitched, now we're ready to flip it over. We're looking at wrong sides, and I've marked on here my 1-inch fold line. I've also trimmed this seam allowance a little bit away just to remove some bulk because I'm going to be putting snaps into this placket. So I marked from this seam line over 1 inch all the way up, and I'm going to fold my placket towards the wrong side at that fold line. One thing I did to confirm it's folded correctly is I measured on the right side out. I measured this as a consistent 1-inch width all the way along the length here. So I'm looking at the wrong side of the fabric, and I went ahead and clipped it all the way up to the neckline. And there's 2 ways that you can finish the top here. And there's in the instructions, I describe it by folding this edge down and then folding it over itself. And that'll seal the edges at the top. Another way of doing it is from the neckline up. You fold this placket right sides together on itself, and then you stitch straight across from where the hood ends over on just on the placket. So the placket is opened, folded under itself, and I'm going to stitch from right here where the hood stops, a horizontal line straight across. Okay, so I stitched that straight line across with a black stitch, same color as the marker. So there's a stitch line right here that ends right at the top of the hood, and I didn't catch hood at all. So now I'm going to trim this seam allowance at the top, and then I'm going to flip this to where it's right sides outwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this seam allowance away, grab the corner, and flip this on itself. And then you can use a pen or whatever just to push that out. So what that does is, if you can see it, it creates a nice finished edge right at the top, and that'll be perfectly even with the tops of the hood when they come together. Okay, to finish off the placket, I folded the raw edge under itself, and this is the wrong side of the fabric, so I folded that raw edge under, and I cannot see the stitch line that I did earlier along that it was inside that seam allowance. I've pinned it all down, and now I'm going to flip it over and I'll sew straight down the existing seam line that's right here on the edge all the way down, making sure that it's catching the underside to hold that raw edge inside. Then at the top, I just dressed the seams on the inside here to where there's no exposed raw edges as it comes around the top of the hood. Okay, so I went ahead and stitched that. This is the wrong side, and you can see that there's a seam holding that raw edge down. And from the right side, I followed that stitch line all the way up, and then I separated a little bit so you can see it. but I just secured this top edge with a nice back tack a couple times. Just try to stay right on your existing seam line there. I separated so you could see it. But along this front edge, it looks like there's just one seam line all the way down. When you have both sides done, when you go to install it into the front seam here, these two plackets will overlap each other because center front is right down the middle of this. Right, so there should be a 1/2 inch overlap on both sides with center front right in the middle, and that will make sure that the front upper and the front lower align exactly correctly. And at the top, the same thing, they overlap 1 to 1, and you would install your snaps dead center into that placket.